Hey guys, Adrian Shepherd here, author of iSucceed and creator of iSucceedbook.com. And today I'm on the line with Mr. Andy Hoffman, who's often referred to as Ranting Andy Hoffman. And he works at Miles Franklin, which is a precious metal dealer that has been in business for over 30 years or so.
24.
Okay, close.
Close enough.
Close. Andy has devoted the past 10 years of his life to precious metals and is one of the smartest people I know when it comes to understanding the inner workings of the financial system. It's a pleasure to have you on the line with us today, Andy.
And thanks for having me. This is the longest podcast I've ever done in my life.
Okay, well, great. I'm honored, I guess. Could you start out by sharing with us a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Okay, well, right now I live in Denver. I've been here for 5 years, but I moved here from New York, which is where I was born, and I went to school for finance, and I worked on Wall Street for 15, 20 years. I have a CFA. I was a buy-side analyst. I was a trader. I was a sell-side analyst. I had all the big houses that people are well aware of, Merrill Lynch, Solomon, you name it. I pretty much worked there. And I left in 2005, but 2002 is when I started to see the light about what was going on in the world. I started to read people like Richard Russell and Jim Sinclair, who said that the dollar was getting ready to fall steeply and gold would rise. I became 100% invested in the sector back then. It's almost 11 years now. And when I finally left Wall Street in 2005, which frankly, I left because I didn't like the conflict of interest that I had to deal with. I was a sell-side analyst. I was told constantly what to write, how to rate things, and at some point, with all the scandals, because I spent 7 years at Solomon Smith Barney, I was I couldn't take it anymore, put it that way. And so I was already invested in precious metals, so I re-educated myself in the field. I had all my money there, so I figured I might as well recreate myself. And I worked after that for 5 years. I worked for mining companies in investor relations, an investor relation consultant. But even as that time went on, I realized that mining companies were just as dangerous as the mainstream investments that I had been recommending for years, mostly in the oil sector, by the way. And in 2011, I've been writing free missives about protecting yourself and buying precious metals back as far as 2003 or 4. In 2011, I got an opportunity to join Miles Franklin, one of the oldest, largest precious metal dealers in the States, as their marketing director. And now I can work full-time writing about precious metals, about how to protect yourself. And again, it's not just about precious metals. It's about realizing that all the fiat money creation over the last 40 years has caused major inflation that's causing a lot of problems in the world and will probably cause greater problems in the coming years. So I write about helping people to protect themselves, but specifically on the financial side, which is where my background is.
Okay. Well, that's a mouthful. I mean, that's quite a story, all those big name companies, and I mean, I'm sure you have lots of adventures from working over there. Could you share with us some lessons that you learned from working on Wall Street?
Right. Okay. And I try to write about these things all the time for the people who are listening for the first time. I write a free daily blog. Just go to milesfranklin.com. They're all archived there, or you can put an email address and get them emailed to you. And again, I'm trying to bridge the gap between this mysterious world of Wall Street, which I spent many, many years at, and then the real world, because the people on Wall Street, combined with the people in Washington and the people in the mainstream media, are telling you one story about the world, and I'm trying to tell you the real story. And look, when you work on Wall Street, Wall Street has changed over time. When I was there, the businesses that were thriving are no longer thriving. It used to be you do stock research, but the markets have become so commandeered by the government that it's really not as value added to do stock research anymore. And at the same time, the biggest business that we had was underwriting stock offerings, and that business, with the recession that we've had going on for 5 years, has pretty much died. So when you hear about Wall Street doing well, it's not the Wall Street that I worked on. I was laid off in 2005, and the layoffs have continued for years because right now what Wall Street does is they have what's called a carry trade, where the government prints money for zero interest rate, gives it to the banks, and the banks can speculate in either treasury bonds or the markets. And they also have created these complex derivatives that people have heard about, which are really, for the most part, fraudulent because they're a zero-sum game. There's always going to be, everyone is ultimately going to lose when companies default. And I just try to let people know in my writings that Wall Street is not as glamorous as it looks. And of the people that are there, very few of them are taking away all of the money, and most of it is tainted.
Okay. Not good news for people out there who are investing in the stock market.
Well, look, the stock market was freely traded when I worked for it, and it was only 8 years ago when I left. We always had what was called, anyone could Google it, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. Some people call it the PPT. In fact, that name was coined by George Stephanopoulos when he was still working for Bill Clinton. So that came from the government, that name. And the President's Working Group on Financial Markets was created in 1987, right after the stock market crash. Ronald Reagan was the president who signed it, and basically it was created to protect the market in times of crisis. So when I was in the stock market, mostly in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that really was what it was used for. When you had crises like the long-term credit capital management issue in 1998 and the collapse of the ruble, the collapse of the Mexican peso, 9/11, that's when it came in. It was just there for, quote, emergencies. But what I've seen over the last, let's call it 5 to 10 years, with the economies of the West falling apart so fast, what they've been doing is using it pretty much on a daily basis right now, especially now that they've created these computer algorithms known as HFT, or high-frequency trading. And anyone who's really watching the market every day can see that these things are moving the market at will. In fact, if you Google the term Dow Jones Propaganda Average, it's a piece I wrote a year ago where I'm showing that the stock market pretty much almost every day moves with the same pattern, just as gold is manipulated downward with the same patterns every day. So, again, Wall Street was a different animal when I was there only 8 years ago or 10 years ago. And right now it's become more of a mouthpiece of the powers that be, let's call them.
Okay. That's a shame for those people out there who don't understand that. It used to be a fairly traded system where everyone could benefit, but now it seems like it only benefits the few, is what you're saying, basically, right?
Yeah, I talk about the President's Working Group. You can Google it. Their charge is to support the stock market. Now, everyone knows about, of course, the term QE, which is the Federal Reserve charged with supporting the bond market. There's also another group you can Google that's called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. It was created back in the 30s. And again, it's a government agency. They may not call it an agency, but it is. And it's charged with supporting, or actually they don't use the word supporting, managing the currency and gold markets as needed. And then, of course, what I call the gold cartel, which is more secretive. No, there have been gold has been manipulated forever. In the 1960s, there was an overt group called the London Gold Pool, which tried to hold gold at $35 an ounce until it failed because demand was so strong. Now you have a covert one, of which I've dedicated the last 8 or 10 years to showing exactly what they do. So the point is, markets out there are not real anymore. It's a shame because I had to get rid of my entire vocation and recreate myself into reality. And I think most people are starting to realize that there's a major decoupling going on with, for instance, the Dow and the reality of weak economies and inflation around the world. Okay.
Now, one of the arguments you often hear when you talk to people about gold or precious metals is that, they say, well, there's no dividend and you can't make them, you can't change them like real estate or improve upon them. They just are what they are. And some people, refer to them as relics. And, I'm sure you've heard this before, but don't people say, well, isn't gold just part of like the old world, like the old paradigm? And now that we're, we are beyond that we've got technology and all these great things that, that make these things kind of obsolete?
Right. Well, of course, I've heard everything. And, the term, when you say the term relic, that actually goes all the way back to John Maynard Keynes, who's the father of, quote, Keynesianism, which simply means that the government, it's an economic theory that says the government should interfere in monetary and fiscal policy. Of course, it's been massively disproven throughout history, but governments obviously like it. That's why it gets promulgated throughout time and somehow seeps its way into the government-funded schools. Look, I've heard of everything. Yes, anyway, Keynes said gold's a barbarous relic at one point, but the fact is it's a silly concept. Gold has been around for as long as man has been around, for 5,000 or 6,000 years of history. It's been the only object that has been a store of value throughout time. I mean, it's in the Bible about a couple of thousand times. There's not one reference to paper money in the Bible. And there's been, I think, 599 fiat currencies. And for people listening, fiat means unbacked, which right now is what every currency in the world is. Every one of them has failed, and everyone will fail. And just look at all the debts exploding around the world and the inflation in your lives to know that, of course, the dollar and the euro and the yen are next. Heck, the yen has fallen 18% or 20%, I think, now in the past 4 months. So people in Japan are seeing massive inflation. Now, when people say, well, gold doesn't pay a dividend, well, of course it doesn't pay a dividend. It's an inert object. But the fact is that the dividends that are being paid in fiat currencies now are at record lows. I mean, we are literally, if you want a T-bill in the United States, you're getting essentially zero. If you want a T-bill in Switzerland, you are paying to have that T-bill. So what they call that is NIRP, negative interest rate policy, because there are places in the world now where interest rates are negative. So under that mosaic, gold actually pays a higher dividend than treasury bills in some places. And to say that, even a 10-year bond in the United States is paying 2% right now, when even the government, which understates inflation massively, says that inflation's 2%. So it's the equivalent of getting no interest rate. Of course, if you go to a website called Shadow Stats, John Williams is the guy who runs it. He does charts of what the real inflation is compared to what the government says. And real inflation in the United States has, been closer to 8 to 10% for the past decade, as opposed to the 1 or 2% the government tells you. But you don't need me to tell you that, because anyone who's listening to this, whether you're in the United States or even Japan where you are, knows that inflation is dramatically higher. I mean, anyone who gets health insurance or buys food or has college tuition, basically anything that you need in life has been going up in value. Anything you want in life, like an iPod, goes down. You don't need an iPod to live, but you certainly need food, energy, and shelter, and those are going up in price. So, to the detractors, I've heard everything. I've heard you can't eat gold, you can't, all these things. You can't eat treasury bonds either. But look, over time, gold is the only thing that has retained its value, and it will continue to do so. And as more people are scared of inflation worldwide, then more people will start to get rid of their paper currencies and buy real items of value.
So would real estate be one of those things?
Well, real estate is a tricky one because, again, the cardinal rule is, and I wrote a piece that's called Want versus Need. Of course, if you're Googling, you have to write Miles Franklin after that, because want versus need is kind of a generic term. But real estate, in my opinion, is certainly not something you, quote, need to live on, because you can always rent. And that's why there's been so much propaganda that brainwashes people into believing you need to buy a house, when just look what happened in the United States alone in the last few years to people who bought houses. And again, when you buy a house with a mortgage, a big mortgage, it's the bank that owns the house. You didn't really even buy a house. And you understand, you're in Japan, their real estate bubble peaked 25 years ago. In Europe, it's still falling, free fall rate in places like Spain and Italy and Ireland. So the fact is, real estate is tricky because there's part of it is a personal standpoint. I live here in Denver. I plan to live here. And I bought a house here. I wouldn't buy a house in New York. My wife and I almost had a divorce about it 6 years ago because I knew New York was overpriced and I didn't want to live there. But there are family aspects. So it is okay to buy a house if you understand that you can pay for it and you don't want to, and you don't want to leave it, meaning you don't need to sell it, because real estate can be very tricky. And I believe that the economies of the world will continue to get worse. And if you happen to be lucky and be in the right situation where a real estate market is better than others, that's great. But there's going to be a lot more pain in the real estate world for people who are not in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you can't just pick up real estate if you want to, get out of Dodge or whatever. If things get dicey, you either choose to stay there or leave it. You don't get an option really. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
It worked. My parents, who are far from investment people, just because look, they bought their first house in the '60s, which was just as you had this big boom in the United States starting, and then they bought a house in the early '80s, and then the '90s, and then the 2000. Every time they bought a new house, they'd make a profit on their old one just because it was a boom.
Sure.
And but then the boom ended, and there are a lot of people who started life at the wrong time. It's like Warren Buffett. Everyone says what a genius he is, and I mean, I'm not even going to go into what a horrible, evil person he is, but just from an investment standpoint, of course he's a smart man. I mean, he's made some great investments, but again, he started his stock career in the 1950s, which was literally the bottom of the stock market. I started my stock career in the 1990s, which was the top of the market. So sometimes it's just lucky, and people who are buying real estate now are playing with fire. I mean, anyone who bought real estate in the 2000s already realizes that. I mean, some of them have lost their livelihood, their lives over it. But people are buying now. It's pure speculation because it can collapse just as much as it can go up.
Okay. I would like to just point out something interesting here. You talked about inflation, and I know that from talking to friends who live in the States and Europe, things are going up. I mean, like England, my father used to travel back and forth there because that's where he was from, and water, like bottles of water were going up, drastically. It's like some ridiculous, $3 or $4 a bottle. It was pretty, ludicrous for my father because he lived in Asia. He was like, water? Come on, give me a break. But here in Japan's an interesting thing is how inflation, I think, is taking root. Is really what they're doing is they're keeping the prices the same, and what they're doing is actually just shrinking the amount of product that you get food-wise. I mean, for example, potato chips suddenly have 20% more air. So they're keeping the same price, and it looks like it's the same product, but really they've just been able to take out 20% of the items that are inside it. The product that you're buying, the potato chips or, the drink, they change the bottle slightly to cut down, again, 10% or 20%. It's pretty clever, so people don't feel inflation. It's pretty clever. And the great thing is that within 6 months, people have forgotten what the old size was. So it's remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's across the board. We see that here everywhere. We're talking about every with my wife the other day about paper towels. I mean, I'm trying to show like this is what a normal sheet of paper towel would look like. Our current ones are literally half the size. I mean, they just don't absorb. They're that small. So, I mean, people are starting to get it. I mean, the stories are everywhere. My friend Mike Krieger he's constantly putting out articles showing all the different places, but that this happens. But again, these are the small things in life, worrying about, whether if they have too much air in the potato chips. Everyone knows that the essentials of life are going up. I mean, gasoline prices are at their all-time high around the world, certainly for this time of year. I mean, our prices are spiking right now, and this is February. This is the middle of the winter time. So, I can only imagine what it's going to be like this summer. And then, of course, the big one, medical insurance, which is, I mean, literally rising at 20% a year. And for Americans out there, I mean, Obamacare is going to massively, massively spike the costs of health care and reduce the efficiency of it to a point where it itself could cause, inflation fears across the country, just that one aspect. And when you talked about England and Japan, I mean, they are perfect examples of major inflation because it's no coincidence. It's funny because the Japanese government claims they have this deflation, and again, want versus need. Real estate hasn't come back, but Tokyo has literally been the most expensive city on the planet for I think 15 years in a row. And take a guess what number 2 is. It's London, and it's because they are the two countries that are they're quote first world countries, but they with their own central banks, but they don't have the reserve currency. So they print as much money as the Federal Reserve does on a quote pound for pound basis, but they don't have the reserve currency. So it doesn't get absorbed into the world the way the dollar does, at least the way the dollar does now. The dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status, and that's why Tokyo and London are two of the most expensive cities now. Don't get me wrong, the United States has some of the most expensive cities too. New York is probably in the top 5. I haven't looked lately, but I lived there for a long time. But I was in London last year, and London, it actually shocked me. It definitely beat New York.
Yeah.
I've never been to Tokyo though.
Well, there's actually some good deals here, amazingly. So the tough thing is land, though. That's the big one. The cost of land is just, insane over here. I mean, for the size that you get, really, that's the thing. It kind of blows people's minds when they come here for the first time how much they have to spend for such a small amount of space. But you adjust. And
but there's deflation, according to the government. So much deflation that they're willing to destroy the yen. And they have taken 20% of the value out of the yen in a whopping 4 months. And, look, it's really hard to tell one currency versus the other what one should be because it's all garbage against garbage. But back 15, 20 years ago, the yen was 200 yen to the dollar. And today it's 94 yen to the dollar. If it goes back to 200 yen to the dollar, you're going to have such incredible inflation in Japan, it won't even be comprehensible. More importantly, you're going to have trade wars, with China alone, let alone with Europe and the United States. And that's just Japan. That's just one country that's playing the competitive currency wars. We're doing it here. Britain's doing it. The ECB is complaining about it right now. And let's face it, Europe is the worst economy in the world right now. So believe me, if the yen falls any further and they lose more market share, manufacturing market share to Japan, they're going to step up their currency devaluation. And, it's only a matter of time before the pain gets so great that everyone goes all out and the hyperinflation begins. Because again, for anyone listening, the definition of a Ponzi scheme means something must continue to grow to survive. And it also must have confidence in it to survive. And that's why you have, quote, QE to infinity in all these countries, because paper currency, fiat currency, must by definition continue to grow. And it goes from geometric growth to arithmetic growth, and eventually parabolic growth. And that's when hyperinflation sets in. And will it happen in 2013? Maybe 2014. It's not going to be 2020.
Okay, so basically you're saying that fiat currencies are a Ponzi scheme.
Yes, by definition,
okay.
That's what they are. And again, for anyone who's so comfortable with the dollar and the euro and the yen, there have been 599 fiat currencies throughout history. Every single one has failed. In fact, the only ones that haven't failed were simply because their nation was taken over by another nation. And that currency eventually failed. This will fail. And again, this is the first time in history, going back to 1971, when the United States abandoned the gold standard. It's the first time in history where not a single nation on earth has a currency that's backed by anything.
Does that worry you?
Yes. Well, that's what I'm trying to say. This is what I talk about every day. Every fiat currency will fail. And again, it takes time. Usually it takes about 40 years. And guess how old this currency system is? It's 40 years, except it's usually one or two currencies. This time, all of the currencies have been fiat currencies for 40 years. And look at what's happening to the debt and the inflation and the employment and the government, the draconian acts that the governments are taking to support a status quo that's dying. It terrifies me, which is why at the end of every piece that I write, I say protect yourself. And again, the financial side means to get out of your dollars into items of real value. But it's also, the way I think of it is, think of the worst case scenario of major inflation, of social unrest, and think if you are prepared for that to happen. Because the last thing you want to do is have nothing stored, have all your money in dollars or yen or euros, and just hope that the government will take care of you. Because anyone who's been watching these governments, the last couple of years, the last decade or two, realizes that they could not care less if you live or die. In fact, they'd be happy if you're dead because it's just less people around for them to take care of.
I think that the problem is a lot of people out there they've grown up in a world where things just kept getting better. From basically the end of World War II, things seemingly, on the surface anyway, seemed like they kept getting better. The houses kept getting nicer, technology kept improving. And so when you talk about, for example, ravaging inflation or hyperinflation, people they just can't see it. It happens in places like Zimbabwe and maybe Argentina, but it can't happen to first world nations, according to people that I talk to. They like to believe that. Obviously, I agree with you. I don't see any way we can get out of it. I just think we're better at postponing the inevitable than maybe those countries because of our position in the world. But
put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
A gold standard prevents debt from accruing. Mm-hmm. The only way that you can accrue debt, meaning the only way you're allowed as a central bank to print money, and thus printing money means accruing debt, is if you have the gold to back it. Now, gold supply over time has gone up very, very slowly, maybe 1% a year. And that's why you haven't had debt over time until they got rid of the gold standard. In fact, the United States right now alone, just the United States, has $16.5 trillion of published debt. That's just published. They also have a lot of stuff which is off balance sheet. For instance, they have $5 trillion of debt for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are owned by the government. But they consider them, quote, off balance sheet. And somehow when they're calculating debt ratios, they don't count this, even though it's debt. And then, of course, you have what's called unfunded liabilities, which like, for instance, the actuarial calculations of what the government will owe people for Social Security and Medicare and all that. And that's, I've seen numbers as high as 200 trillion. So they don't even count these numbers. But the fact is, when you're on a gold standard, these numbers can't go up. They can only go up as much as the gold supply goes up. So once they got rid of the gold standard, it was like having a credit card that had no balance on it at all. And because people don't believe this, but in 1971, when we got off the gold standard, I believe the U.S. debt was $200 billion, something like that, or $300 billion. It took them 200 years to build $200 billion. It's taken Obama alone 3 years to build $6 trillion. Okay? So my point is, it was like the standard of living kept going up because we tried this experiment where we got off the gold standard. Everyone had a credit card with no balance on it. Everyone charged the heck out of it. In fact, the only reason the Japanese met their issues 10 years earlier is simple demographics. The Japanese population is 10 years older, literally 10 years older than the United States. It's the oldest population on Earth. I think its average age is about 46 now, whereas the United States, it's 36. So it was simple demographic spending patterns where they did things 10 years earlier. But, and the standard of living has, since World War II, gone up. Well, particularly if you're American, because again, World War II, America took over the world because the rest of the world destroyed itself. Europe was a shambles. Japan was a shambles. Russia was a shambles. So we, in the United States, we were given, per the Bretton Woods Agreement, the world's reserve currency. So our currency, not only did we have no credit card, but we had the reserve currency. So for about 50 or 60 years, the standard of living of the entire world went up until everyone looked up circa 2008 and realized that the credit cards were fully charged up. And there was kind of a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card was the ability of the banks in 2008 to the central banks to say, we're going to print trillions of dollars to get through this crisis. Okay, they printed the trillions of dollars. Now the debt is vastly worse, except everyone's looking up 5 years later and realizing, yeah, but the world is a lot worse off. We have all this debt now. Inflation is dramatically worse. Employment is worse everywhere. Economies are falling. So that get-out-of-jail-free card's been used, and our credit cards are maxed up. And it's only a matter of how long can, quote, the powers that be in the Western world keep the game going without full collapse. And even if they keep it going, it's going to mean a continued increase in inflation and an increase in unemployment. But eventually, the big one is going to hit, And could it be 2013? You're darn right it could be. And if not, it'll be 1 year, 2 years. It's not going to be much longer.
So you believe it's 100% inevitability that these currencies are going to fall kind of one by one?
599 fiat currencies in history, all have failed. And the debt numbers now are greater than everything in history ever combined. And all you have to do is look around you to see what the world looks like, to realize things are getting worse, not better. And when I say worse, each day that things get worse, the debts get worse, the inflation gets worse. It doesn't get better temporarily. So it's only a matter of when. And that's why I tell people from a financial standpoint to buy physical gold and silver, because it doesn't matter the time frame. Physical gold and silver will hold their value throughout time. And the powers that be who are trying to keep you out of them and in their fiat currency can never get you out of the real stuff. If you're in their financial markets, their stocks, their bonds, even their paper gold and silver investments like mining shares and ETFs, they'll get you out of them. They always do. Believe me, I've been taken out as much as the next guy because it's a rigged market. The real thing, though, is, gold and silver are real money. And once you touch them, just touch a gold or silver coin, and you realize how heavy it is and do some research into what went into taking it out of the ground and how much it cost, you'll realize that it's real money.
Okay. Who are 2 or 3 people or 2 or 3 books that you think people should follow or read up on if they really wanted to find out about the financial system or investing as a whole? What that could really help them for the future.
Right. Well, I wouldn't say so much books. Yes,
okay.
there are books out there, but there's no need with the internet anymore to read full books about it. I wouldn't even know which books. Some of them are antiquated. There's a whole bunch of there's so much stuff out there. I would just recommend going to all the places on the internet where what I call good, smart people are writing. And, Miles Franklin, where I write, is one of them because I write every day, 5 days a week. So does David Sheckman, our founder. He's 70 years old. He's been writing for decades about the same thing. And Bill Holter also. 3. If you don't like it, then don't do it. And then there's other guys. Go to JS Mindset. Read Jim Sinclair. He's known as Mr. Gold. He's been following the gold markets for 40 years. He also writes for free. There's a guy named Richard Russell. He's cheap. He's not free. He's been writing for 60 years or so. He's almost 90 years old. There's a guy named James Turk. Go to King World News website. You'll see some really smart people there. Really, goldsilver.com, Silver Doctors. But for the most part, you don't need books. You just need to find the people who know what they're talking about and read the many, many free missives that are out there. And you'll get all you need. It's pretty simple.
You've also got YouTube as well to listen to many of those people that you mentioned.
Yeah, like this podcast we're doing. It's amazing.
Sure.
You're in Japan. I'm in the United States. It'll probably be up on YouTube in the next couple of days. I do 2 or 3 podcasts a week, and there's many others that are free. Heck, if you just Google gold, silver, you'll find tons of things. But again, you have to be careful who you're listening to because there's so much propaganda out there. This is a life or death battle between the entrenched, quote, leaders of the world who depend on fiat currency as their power base. And once the confidence goes in the fiat currency, they will lose their power base. And that's pretty much, the heads of state and the congresses and parliaments in the major countries of the world, whether it's Japan, the United States, or Germany or England. So there is a lot of propaganda, and you have to be careful who you listen to.
Most definitely. That's the great thing about the internet. Almost unlimited access to information, but at the same time, you've got to determine which is the good information and which is not. You're absolutely right.
And that's, by the way, to me, that's the greatest skill that I've honed over it's 11 years now. Is again, I call them the good, smart people. You would be one of them. I would be one, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Who know what they're talking about, and their intentions are equally good, because there's plenty of people out there. Heck, the guys at J.P. Morgan, you think they're stupid? You think they don't know what they're doing? But the point is, they are trying to deceive you. They know what the real picture is, but that's not what they're telling you.
Yeah, most definitely. Unfortunately, there are people out there that do not have other people's best interests at heart except their own, and that's unfortunate. You'd think that after all the things we've been through in history that we could just learn to get along and work together and build a better future. But there's always somebody out there that wants to take advantage and hurt other people.
Well, as you say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's basically the gist of it. Because I get so many emails and questions, conspiracies, and the Rothschilds, and all these people trying to take over the world, and I go, I don't think it's that complex. They just want money and power, and if they're given it, they will do anything to protect it. They don't care about running the world. They just want to have cool lives where they have, some people are into power more than money, but some are into both, and they just want to be able to rule and have cars and boats and stuff, and they don't really care who they step on to get them.
It's sad, but unfortunately, it's a part of life. We just have to learn how to protect ourselves best we can.
Correct.
Okay. Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me. It's been a great honor. I've been a follower of yours for a few years now. I know that you've only been with Miles Franklin for about two years now. Is that right?
A year and a half. Yeah.
Okay, year and a half. But I followed you a little bit before that on, was it GATA, right?
GATA, absolutely.
Yeah.
2004 even.
Yeah. So, thank you so much. Could you, one more time, give people your website information so everybody can find you? They need to track you down later on.
Again, Miles Franklin is one of the largest bullion dealers in the States. We've been around for 24 years. AAA, A+ Better Business Bureau rating, and we've had no complaints. And just give us a call, give us a shot to just to talk to you. We're not into pitching, we're into educating. It's milesfranklin.com, MILES, Franklin as in Ben Franklin.com. Our phone number is 800-822-8080. And if you have a personal question for me, it's Hoffman, Hoffman, at milesfranklin.com.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Great. Thank you, Adrian.
Take care, sir.
You too.